Hello and welcome to the Stansberry Investor Hour. I'm Dan Ferris. I'm the editor of Extreme Value and the Ferris Report, both published by Stansberry Research.
And I'm Corey McLaughlin, editor of the Stansberry Daily Digest. Today we talk with Rob Spivey of our corporate affiliate Altimetry.
It's been a little while since we've spoken with Rob, our friend and colleague, and he is a very smart guy. He'll teach us about accounting and businesses that he likes, and we're also going to talk about AI and DOGE, and he's going to make all of this make sense and put it all together for us, and I can't wait for him to do it. So let's do it right now. Rob, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Dan, same to you and to Corey. Thanks, guys, for the time.
It's been a little while. I just looked you up here, and I think you were last on the show in December of 2023. So I think we need to catch our listeners up with you, and you up with them, I should say. So, why not just tell our listeners a little bit about, who you are and what you do, and what Altimetry is about.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and for those who don't know us, so Altimetry, we're focused on the idea really that the problem with a lot of investing out there and a lot of the investment research you get out there in the world is a lot of it, if it starts with fundamentals, is starting with bad numbers, just first and foremost. Right? Bad numbers that are coming from Wall Street, bad numbers that are coming from filings and everything else, because the fact that the underlying accounting behind all of it, right? Accountants structurally they're all about basically just balancing the numbers, not about giving investors an understanding on what real corporate profitability is, what real corporate growth is, what real corporate valuations are. So we do at Altimetry is we do what we call uniform accounting. We clean up the accounting, we restate it to get to what real economic profitability is, growth, valuations. Then all of a sudden, Dan, right, we can all of a sudden uncover things like which companies really have a margin of safety in their business, which companies have strong profitability. And then once you get all those all those numbers accurate, all of a sudden then we can start getting better understanding on what's going for the US as a whole and the economy and the market as a whole, because we got better company data from companies that then gives us better data from everywhere else. And that's what drives our research process and everything else that lets us, pick the stocks that we recommend, lets us pick the bonds that we recommend and have high conviction on them. It starts with better, cleaner data and then better fundamental research after it.
So it sounds like you're doing, better bottom-up analysis with uniform accounting, but you also imply there, correct me if I'm wrong, that you think it also gives you better top-down insights as well.
Yeah, when you think about making decisions, like for instance, right now a topical thing right after all the news earlier this week on the change in tune from tariffs, right? That tariffs are no longer, we're leveling massive ones on everyone. We're really just kind of targeting China and everything else. And you step back and you think, well, what's going on there, right? And so what we can do using when we get cleaned up accounting data is we can actually side by side Chinese and US data and Chinese and US profitability and say, wow, US corporates are actually way more profitable than Chinese corporates. Chinese corporates are playing a volume game. And we can only do that in aggregate because we've cleaned up this data. And when we get, in the bigger question about macro, and this is something that we always come back to and harp on, is when you want to focus on the world of macro and understanding where the market's going, credit signals are really, really important, right? Where the credit markets are going, where credit risk is going is essential to know. And when you try to do credit research like a Moody's or an S&P does with as reported metrics, you just get bad data. But what we can do is when we aggregate, we can all of a sudden get better data on the US as a whole on how high is credit risk and where is credit creation and destruction happening when we get that bigger aggregate data off of that cleaned up data, to your point, Dan. So we can get better macro data too, along with better bottoms up data.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's all of a piece. It makes sense, right? You get better data from the bottom up and it kind of filters up, doesn't it? So
exactly.
But you guys really, though, at Altimetry, you're specializing in, bottom up fundamentals, stock picking and bond picking, right? You're not, your strategy isn't top down. You just get some better top down insights.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are not Stanley Druckenmiller, right? We are
Right.
not. We're not
Well said.
having. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are. Our focus first and foremost is finding great companies, and then finding great fundamental thematic stories that can help us identify those companies, right? Like right now, big themes that we're talking about are areas like, for instance, that the huge AI investment that's happening around the U.S. and around the globe, and we're saying, hey, we can then use our better cleaned up fundamental bottoms up accounting data to identify which are the companies that we can pick off that are riding that. Exactly, Dan.
Okay, well, I'm glad you
AI
said it.
still happening? I thought everything was about tariffs now. AI is still going on. That's a good point, right? Did we forget about that?
Shockingly,
Yeah.
right? Shockingly, it's funny. We talk about this idea that when you look from 94 to 2000, look, there's the history never repeats. History always rhymes, right? So it's not like ever the exact same. But if you want to look at the most recent graph that we can do for something like this, in 94 to 2000, right, we had a huge tech adoption cycle. In that huge tech adoption cycle, right, NASDAQ up 600%. Right? Who knows where the NASDAQ or anything is going to go at the end of the AI adoption cycle. But the important thing is everybody remembers that. And we draw this magical line that goes up and to the right. Everybody forgets there were 10% pullbacks in the NASDAQ from late 1994 till the 2000 bubble. 10% pullbacks. There was one in 1998 that was 35% because we had a combination of, wait, ready for this?
Yeah.
We had geopolitical uncertainty because we had the Asian financial crisis, we had Russia defaulting, and we had LTMC, right? So you look at all that, and that sent the market crashing. But anybody who stopped and said, well, wait a second, exactly your point, Corey, does any of this disrupt the fact that everybody wants to get on the internet and every single thing that's happening from a technology perspective is happening there? No. And quite frankly, whatever tariffs do to try to redistribute, however unproductive they are to redistribute global growth, the fact that we are in a global arms race for AI is not changing, and every company wants to. And so, to your point, Corey, you really got to make sure to not take your eye off the ball for that, in our opinion, anyways.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I mean, it is, and a lot of people have taken their eye off
Right.
the ball. I mean, I think right now. So it's interesting where we are in the AI cycle because right, my mind goes to these last 2 years of the stock market, right? The 20% gains S&P 500, and that was the last time we saw that was the lead up to the .com bubble. It would assume or presume that you're going to have pullbacks until that point becomes obvious, at the top of it. I mean, maybe we're seeing it now. I can't say for sure, but yeah, no, it's interesting. The points brought up there for sure.
All right, let's go there. We're the topic is broached. You guys have an upcoming presentation, and you've got some serious views about AI relative to DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, created by Trump and Musk, Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and Vivek Ramaswamy, who apparently went off to become the governor of Ohio or something. But like all I see is somebody trying to cut out waste, but you see something entirely different happening here. And when you told it to me a little while ago, I was like, oh, I never put 2 and 2 together and made 4 out of it as you did in this situation. So how do you get from DOGE trying to get rid of government excess and fraud and waste and so forth to AI? Like, what's the connection?
Yeah, which is a reasonable question, right? But if you actually step back and you look at what Elon has been doing and what DOGE's philosophy has been, and when you look underneath in the background in terms of what David Sachs is, basically tasked to do as the AI czar, a lot of what Elon has been doing is about actually uncovering data. So yes, there's been headline stories that have obviously the amount that DOGE has saved has changed, right? The numbers have regularly up and down. But the broader thing that's been happening is he has been going after and the people working underneath him who are really acting like junior consultants. This is what junior consultants do. They go out and they get a bunch of data and they try to pull it back and they try to create insights from it. They're trying to gather a ton of data to be able to figure out a couple things. One, what are the things that the US government does that AI can automate? Two, what are things that the US government does that AI can help actually identify how to do it more smoothly, even if it can't automate? right? And so it all comes this idea of Elon has this 5-step plan that he does every single time that he goes out and does anything. He did it at Tesla. He did it at X, Twitter. He did it at SpaceX. And this idea of, he goes out and he tears in to say, first, let's question every requirement, right? Let's question why we're doing anything that we're doing. You saw this with USAID. You saw this with the U.S. Department of Education. Then it's delete any part or process you can, right? Where he basically is saying, hey, let's cut deep. Let's cut sometimes even into muscle to basically make sure that we are getting to the root of what we're trying to do. Then simplify, then accelerate, which we've seen, and then last, automate. And so what we're seeing him do is this idea of let's first get all the data together. And now already they're starting to roll out AI tools, right? They rolled out this thing, GSAI, right? When GSAI, what that was all about was to basically say, hey, we analyze tons of data at the government. Let's actually build a tool that can let us dump data in from the government to dump data in, and then to be able to come out with conclusions. So for instance, the Treasury, right, the US Treasury, hey, let's be able to dump data in to identify where are we seeing weird things going on with the IRS? Where are we seeing weird things going on with Social Security or anything else? And all this is happening, and this is what we've seen so far is really only phase one. Because phase one, like any good consulting engagement, and right, having experienced a few myself, what you do in a consulting engagement is phase one is always gather as much data as you possibly can. One, data to get the lay of the land, and also the data that you're going to lose. And then phase two is when you actually do the implementation. And this is what we think that we're about to see right now. We're about to go to phase two. They've gone through all the data gathering, and some of the cost cutting, is going to stick around. Some of the cost cutting may go up or down. But the real story is going to be how they unleash AI in the government. And that's going to be the real way that they can save money and make the government more efficient, is once we get to the point where AI is actually doing a lot of the stuff that, I think it was the Turing Institute, basically said that more than 80% of US government tasks, global government tasks, are mundane, process-driven data entry. All that stuff is what AI can do. And so our point, which we think is really interesting, Dan, is this is the kind of environment where what Elon and what DOGE is kicking off is going to be transformational for years to come in terms of the US government, but also in terms of how it's moving the Overton window for the whole entire US economy on what it's okay for us to use AI for or not. And so that's the big story that we think is coming now, that when you get past the noise of tariffs, what the real big story, if we look at a year from now, is going to be.
All right. And why don't you tell our listeners what Overton window means?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Overton window is this idea of basically changing what in common discussion is an okay and appropriate thing for you to discuss, right? So in terms of, right, when you think literally all the conversations that have been happening for the last few years in terms of what is it okay for us to discuss and for us to debate and for us to do and everything, the Overton window is how do you change that perspective in terms of what is okay in common conversation, what is okay in a business meeting, what's okay in a C-suite, what is okay in a government conversation, say, yeah, we can actually let that happen. Right. Yes, we can actually unleash AI to potentially mean a lot of government workers get redistributed. That's an okay conversation to have. That kind of thing.
It was originally purely political, but you're right. It's become a more general term now. So it was like the politically accepted, boundaries, right? and then other people started using it. But okay, so it will change that. It'll be. People, you're right. Elon comes in and he's the first principles. Everything is torn down and rebuilt from first principles, and that certainly will. I mean, if it sticks, that will certainly change the Overton window. That'll change that boundary quite a bit. It's going to be like Overton knocked down the side of the house, kind of thing. And let's face it, it's desperately needed. Something has to change with 36 trillion debt and growing, right? And massive deficits, et cetera, et cetera. I find it interesting that while they're talking about greater efficiency, Trump is also talking about a potential $1 trillion defense budget, and that it's not like we're really gonna reduce spending a whole lot here. I don't see that happening because you can't touch a whole bunch. You can't touch most of it, right? Like I think Michael Lewis came up with like 86% of it, 86% of federal spending. I don't know if that's the real number. I think I came up with with a smaller number than that. I forget what number I came up, but we all agree that you can't touch a whole bunch of it. My question for you, Rob, is can is there any reasonable expectation of the government using AI for all that untouchable stuff like Social Security? I mean, what could it do there? Medicare, what could it do there? Defense, etc. Like, is the question even worth asking? I'm just, you know.
No, I love the question because it's a great point and a great question to have. It's and if you think and remind me, Dan, if I go off on a tangent for one of these in Corey to come back to another one. So I'm going to start with actually healthcare, but I think that there's three different parts of where this is actually a good topic. So one in terms of healthcare. So when you get in the weeds on how Medicare and Medicaid operate, right? And so a lot of what they do is effectively approving services that somebody else is going to manage, right? One of the big HMOs might actually manage the Medicare execution, but Medicare and Medicaid is just kind of giving a stamp blessing. There's a whole ton of work that goes in CMMS and that Medicare does that if you could basically hone in on getting to saying, okay, where does this make sense and where does not make sense? There's all these things like in terms of how we approve and deny treatments, how we think about what is the right process for us to give a treatment for somebody who, say, has an appendectomy. What are the things that we should be doing and making sure that those steps are being followed? A lot of that stuff in terms of that, making sure that we have the right healthcare steps being followed, AI being on top of that and making sure that those things are happening, all of a sudden, one, can speed up your cycle times from a healthcare perspective and also can reduce waste. And so it's not about actually cutting services or even saying we're going to refuse stuff, right? Which is the, basically, deny, right? The what people talk about for HMOs. It's about making sure that the right care is happening at the right place by the right person at the right time. And being able to do that, a lot of that gets slowed down. You talk about this idea, you've probably heard of the idea of doing pre-authorization for things, where what happens is you basically have to call before you get treatment to say, yes, you're allowed to basically have that surgery that might be life-changing surgery for somebody. And if you can speed up some of that stuff, what actually happens is health outcomes improve. And so you can have some stuff there. And there's some really interesting thoughts also of, and this gets not into so much DOGE, but also the broader things that are happening to reduce healthcare costs. If you want to talk about reducing the inefficient parts of the budget, is, when you talk about, it's not happening right now, but when RFK talks about the idea of saying, hey, we're not going to have ads for pharma anymore in the US, that's a goal and aspirations, right? Whether or not pharma lobbyists will ever let that happen is a separate question. But when you think about it from that perspective, the biggest reason why we spend so much more on, say, drugs in the US than we do anywhere else is because of the fact that it's a consumer relationship. If we can break that relationship, we spend 3x more on an average prescription that we have here in the United States than anywhere else in the OECD spends. If we cut that by basically saying, hey, we're going to allow negotiations, that can drive down costs. So there's a lot of ways that in healthcare, we can actually save costs without reducing treatment. And then you get into everything else in terms of defense and you get into, the broader things. But actually, one last thing before I really, really rant, Dan, here, because I know I've gotten on a soapbox, is we at Altimetry, the way that we think about it, and I know that you've heard Joel, our chief investment strategist, Joel Littman, talk about the U.S. deficit and everything else. We actually like to make a distinction when we think about the U.S. deficit and U.S. government spending, that there is, and it all comes to what basically the fiscal multiplier effect is. And what this is the idea of, when you put $1 in, when the government puts $1 in, how many dollars come out for US GDP? And there are things that are spending, which is the US government spends money and the fiscal multiplier effect is below 1. So this is something like, say, Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security. You give somebody Social Security, there's plenty of people, right? My parents are a great example of this, who get Social Security, they don't need it. They put it into savings. That dollar that's sent to them does not go back in the economy to create GDP growth. But some stuff like defense spending has a fiscal multiplier effect of 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. You could argue some of that is investment. It's not actually just spend, because when the U.S. government spends that, that means greater GDP growth. And for every $1 trillion the U.S. government takes on debt, only costs $50 billion in actual interest expense. And when that leads to a lot more tax growth, which it has the last few years in that, you kind of look at it and you go, not all spending is bad for the US government, but the whole entire idea of unlocking AI is about getting more efficient for that less fiscal multiplier spend that we can get there, is our thinking on what can happen.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to convince me that the federal government doesn't need drastic amounts of shrinkage, but I understand what you're saying. Um, and it's a very
And how
it's a
did
very
yeah,
business-like approach to thinking about it, and I appreciate that for sure.
I think we could all agree on the government efficiency point. I'm wondering how. So how do AI? It all sounds great. Like how does that translate into some profitability for companies and margins and how does say for like a health take healthcare as an example. Like what how do you look at these major themes and what AI can do and try to find a company or companies or sector that actually gets the most out of the opportunity.
Yeah, and right, and when you look at it, the first thing you have to do is you have to chart out the whole entire ecosystem to understand what where the players are and everything else. And we spent a lot of time in 2023 and early 2024 doing this, what we call the AI blast zone or ecosystem. With the center, it's right obviously the hyperscalers, the Nvidia, but also then right you got the Meta, the Amazons, the Microsofts, and everything in the world. And then one step from that, you kind of it's a spline. You've got the people who are basically helping build out AI, which is the bottom of what we think of the ecosystem in the blast zone, which is you've got your data centers, data center suppliers, and all that. But what's really interesting, to your point, Corey, is when you get to the top half of that blast zone, when we're visualizing it, which is we think of you've got the users, right? So these are the people who are taking AI and using AI companies that are taking AI and using AI to either turn it into a product to sell to somebody or also using it to improve their own business, or ideally doing all three, doing both, right? All three. Then you've got the enablers, right? These are the people who, if you want to use AI, you're going to have to lean on, not from a hardware perspective, but from they're the ones who are going to help you figure out how to do this. This is consultants. This is cybersecurity solutions. This is some level of cloud computing outside of the hyperscalers. And then you've got outside of that, you've got basically the people who are going to make the equipment for those people. And then you've got commodities that are using everything else. And for us, when we look in terms of that user side of it, is going to be when you think about the Amazons of the world nowadays, right? When you think about the Alphabets, the Googles of the world nowadays, those were the ones from the last generation who basically became that. This generation, we're seeing really interesting companies. Like a company that we think of is Twilio. So Twilio is this company that they basically make the software and the solutions for you to run your call center, for you to do anything that you need to do with your customers. Well, what Twilio sits on because of that is a mine of data and a mine of process understanding on that because they've been doing this for 10 plus years, right? The guy who actually built Twilio left from AWS after he helped stand up AWS, one of its creators, and then he stood up this business. And what they're doing now is, right, they're leveraging AI for huge things. The first thing they're leveraging AI is if you're in a call center, literally the AI side by side with you will listen to the conversation that you're having with a customer and go, oh, the last time a customer who asked this question, really they were asking this. Point them towards this and also offer them this sell up because this is a person who looks like they want to be sold. The other thing that they're training the AIs to do and that people are leveraging their technology to do is to literally be able to be the first inbound when somebody calls, right? That the AI answers and it actually sounds like a person as opposed to a please hold and press 1 or 2 or 3, whichever you want, or please tell me in 1 or 2 words what you need. It's not that anymore. Those kind of things are when, and think about how much of the US government, healthcare specifically, but so much of the US government is effectively customer service. And so companies like Twilio are, the great example of how we're seeing AI enablement. Companies use AI to all of a sudden productize and improve their own businesses that we think are going to be that long-lasting value creation that's going to have high ROA, durable moat businesses that are the kind of companies that we on Altimetry love to own.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that because when I look at just the mega tech companies, the data center builders, I just see, I swear to you, Rob, I know they're 10 times better businesses and they're 10 times better financed and they're profitable than WorldCom and Global Crossing. But I swear to you, I can't get that image out of my head of all that capital. It's just like tens of billions of dollars building
Yeah.
out this stuff, right? It's hard for me to not think of those two together. So I'm glad you got me to Twilio. I'm glad you got me out to the user, right? That's because that's where the value sort of rubber hits the road, right?
And I think that it's the two big places that we really think the rubber hits the road are, one, the people who are building AI solutions and tools, because right to your point, Dan, those are the ones who, they're not the capital committers, right? When you look at an Amazon, right? An Amazon is somebody who's literally going from, I mean, they already were a capital intensive business,
Right.
but holy cow, just think about, they're talking about $100 billion in spend in CapEx in data centers.
Yeah.
Right. And this is, and to your point, Dan, right, this is, if you think about the late 1990s, the last three innings of the late 1990s, the internet boom, it was all these people spending massive amounts of money, WorldCom, you said it, on fiber optics and on putting all these wires in the ground and saying, if we make it, they will come. And what happened? I mean, by the way, those fiber optic cables, we're still using, they still have excess bandwidth for those that we're using right now.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And so, but to your point, where you want to go is you want to go to the people who are going to unlock the value. And there's two big parts of that. One is, as I said, the users, the Twilios of the world. The second part of it is, if you want to have great AI, it's not just about, what OpenAI builds as a tool that you can build on top of, what NVIDIA builds as a chip in the warehouse. It's about actually having good data, and not just good data, good organized data. We use the analogy of data is the new oil, which is an analogy that people have thrown around for like 20 years, right? That in the 21st century, data is new oil. But everybody has been missing the most important part of oil, right? I know you two know this, right? There are multiple different prices for crude oil. If you want to buy Louisiana Light Sweet versus Brent crude versus crude from Venezuela or Mexico, they all have different prices because they all have different qualities, right? Some of them are easy to refine. Some of them require crackers and all this other crazy stuff. And because of that, prices are different. When you talk about data is the new oil, that's the important part of the puzzle. Its data needs to be refined and organized and be correctly characterized for AI to be able to chew on it, to be able to unlock all the value AI can unlock. This is, by the way, a huge part of what Elon and everybody at DOGE has been doing with gathering stuff for the US government is to organize it. And there's this other set of companies, which are not the people who are building tools off of AI, but the companies that are going to help these others, be it the government, be it companies, organize the data so that AI can use it and get the correct authorizations for that data. Because if everybody understands that data is the new oil, it becomes even more valuable than people realized before. And so it's that second kind of company, and this is the idea of enablers, right, Dan, that and Corey, when you asked, that these are the companies that make it so you can actually unlock AI without being the ones who have to commit a bunch of capital investment. They're just really smart software companies. And so we think that those, if you think about, when we talked about the idea and you said, hey, our philosophy on what's happening with DOGE, we talk about the idea that we're about to see a bunch of contracts unlocked with DOGE that are going to be deployed for the US government to unlock AI. But when we talk about corporates, because of the Overton window move on what is okay to use AI for, corporates rushing to use AI, these data management, data access, data warehouse, data organizing companies are going to be incredibly important. And nobody's paying attention to them now, especially because everybody's focused on tariffs. So
I see. And I'm sorry, you gave me a lot of information there. Who are they?
Sorry.
Specifically. Like,
I mean, so, right, this goes from, right. So, I mean, I'll give you some examples, but I mean, so if I think about the people who are going to start helping you organize AI, the first part is the consultants, right? And so the consultants, this is guys like Accenture, right, who are going to actually help you organize that figure out how to organize the data. But then you've got software. This isn't a recommendation because this company is not profitable, but an example of a company that is the kind of company that's going to help you warehouse and keep your data in an organized way so you can leverage AI is a Snowflake, right? What Snowflake does is effectively basically lets you create a world where your data is organized, which everybody is going to need. And there's a bunch of other companies that we've identified that we're really excited about, but I'm not going to tell you all of them, Dan, because of the fact that some of them we're holding back for our subscribers.
Absolutely.
But that are like Snowflake, but profitable. Right, but are profitable snowflakes, and actually
good description.
Really good high ROA businesses, return on assets, the things that, Dan, because you and I talk about this all the time in terms of economic moats and return on assets, everything else, that actually really are making money, because that's what matters to us. It's right. Are they really making money is what matters, not just the story. The story can only get you so far. So.
All right. So
yeah, I like that. Profitable snowflakes. I feel like
that was a good
analogy there as well. Yeah.
Like
Works on
Snowflake.
multiple levels, right?
Yeah, get the snowflakes out. Yeah, move on snowflakes. We want the profitable ones. Yeah, it's no. The point about data is the new oil. Yeah, you have heard that for a long time, but we've also know that. I mean, I think we all know just from personal interactions with whatever company or whoever, like, why doesn't this just, why do I have to 2-factor authenticate this and whatever, whatever else? Like, I feel like there's tons of opportunity there. And with Elon, you hear about, one of the things you hear about is like the government still using like, the mainframe computers and every agency having a different system. And that just goes for every industry. So, I mean, and you see these things over history, right? Like the private sector gets ahead of or innovates, right? And then the government catches on. And then what you're talking about now, I think is it going the other way now too. Then the government kind of adopts it, and now what's okay to speak about and implement, in the private world.
We would never expect that to be, that order happens every once in a while, right? I mean, if you think about, right, the internet, right, was ARPANET before it was the internet. There's times when the government actually leads. It doesn't happen a lot lately, but this is an opportunity because of the change in the conversation that we've had because of DOGE and Elon, where the government has the opportunity to actually, right, literally paint the lines on the road to help people understand here's the direction you need to go in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting point about DARPA. We don't think of the government as a technology leader at all. In fact, politically speaking, if you're running for office, like promises around entitlements and even defense or regulatory issues are much more likely to get you elected than saying, I'm going to upgrade the IT.
Right. And yet
nobody runs on I'm going to upgrade the IT, right?
Exactly, right? But when you really think about it, I mean, this is the whole entire idea. But when we interact with the government, when we actually do, outside of when you're enjoying those, those entitlements, right? If you're enjoying Social Security,
right?
Outside of that, right? When you're interacting with the government, you're interacting with stuff that you probably wish the DMV ran better. You probably wish that when you applied for your passport, you didn't have to wait for your passport for, or if you applied for TSA pre or global entry, that you didn't have to wait, 3 to 6 months to get it back and get an approval or something else. You probably wish that those things ran faster. And that all comes to that boring, mundane phrase of IT. You're exactly right.
You know something, Rob? You're exactly right. I had to go down to the DMV, and I was shocked at how efficient and organized it was. And I think licensing is a scam. I hate the government. I want it to be, 80% smaller. I'm almost an anarchist, you might say, libertarian, whatever. Mm-hmm. So don't misunderstand me, but I came out of there thinking, that was such a pleasant experience. I'm less angry about the existence of the DMV. I mean, so that, if we are at a divisive, difficult moment in our country, you're right. They could help themselves by being more efficient, being better at their job, and worrying less about, all the things they worry about, not firing people who've been there for 50 years or whatever. So yeah, I mean, we'd all like to see that. Now, I do worry. I have to admit, like, I hate what the government does. Do I want them doing it more efficiently? And it's kind of a real question. I mean,
yeah, right. I mean, so this is Joel presents in front of the Pentagon, regularly in terms of where U.S. economic, power is relative to the rest of the world and everything else. And one of the points that he's actually made before, which isn't exactly to your point, Dan, but leans into it, is the point that I was making earlier, that idea of if you run a $1 trillion deficit at the U.S. government, but that $1 trillion deficit has any fiscal multiplier effect, meaning it has some level of economic growth that it contributes to the world, mm-hmm. and you get to then tax that, which you do, right? The U.S. government gets to tax that. Well, then you can easily afford as much as you want in terms of government spending. And the big reason, here's the big reason why, and this is get to it. The big reason why is because of the fact that the US is the most profitable country in the world from our corporations.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why the US has the ability to run the deficits that we have, that we run, which, right, anybody who wants to talk about trade deficits and US government deficits being correlated, which I've heard people throw around a little bit, no, they have no connection.
Yeah.
The reason why we're able to do what we do is because of the fact that we have a massive profit surplus here in the United States. When you look at our profits, the economic profits that US corporates make, when we look at it on a uniform accounting basis, $1.2 trillion. You combine China and the rest of the world's economic profits, it's less than half of that. And so the whole entire idea is, when you look at it, we have such a ability to do what we do because when the US government does some spending, US companies have this ability to turn that into profits because we sit on the best corporate profitability in the world and the best corporate business models in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at a China, and this is what's really interesting about us going after, right, really basically kind of zeroing in on China after April 9th, right? When you look at what's going on here, China does not have that leg to stand on. China doesn't have the corporate profitability to allow its government to be able to tax, to be able to then drive growth by actually being able to spend on a deficit basis.
Right.
They don't have that, and we do in the US. And this is this huge dichotomy, which is why a lot of the times the point that Joel's making when we're meeting with people at the Pentagon is, one, look, you don't need it. Don't tell, to your point, Dan, don't tell people on Capitol Hill this, but we don't need to worry about, $1 or $2 trillion deficit. An $8 trillion deficit all day we need to worry about, but a $1 or $2 trillion deficit. But the bigger thing is, maybe don't kick China so hard because China actually doesn't really have another leg to stand on. And if we kick them too hard, we might end up in a hot war, a kinetic war, as opposed to a trade war, which is the observation we have. But to your point, we don't want anybody to be telling Congress that either, Dan, but it's the truth.
I think you and I probably part ways at the fiscal deficit because it does have to be funded, and we do add lots of debt every single day. And I don't think there's any way that an incremental dollar of debt from this point is going to be anything but unproductive. I think we're long past that. The other points you make, we're right. Like this idea of, other countries ripping us off, basically, right? And the trade balance, that's absurd. Like, we get all their stuff
Mm-hmm.
and all they get are dollars. And you're explaining basically the mechanism by, we don't just print them. We create them. They're profit. They're created wealth. So, we have that behind
and they
us.
are smaller, countries. I mean, they're just population and everything.
Absolutely.
Purchasing power.
And this is the misunderstanding with tariffs, right? Is tariffs are about revenue, right? Tariffs are not about profits. And this gets to that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
To your point, Dan and Corey,
Yeah.
So maybe other people sell a bunch of stuff for us and a bunch of revenue comes to the United States. But if that revenue is very low margin revenue, low profit revenue, which most of it is, there's a reason we got rid of it, right? The reason we got rid of it, because we used to do a lot of it, is we said, wow, let's focus on the high return, high profit parts of what we can do. And we'll dominate those. And by the way, we do, hands down. But maybe the stuff that we can't make money on because nobody can, guess what? We'll have a revenue deficit, but we'll have a massive profit surplus on the other side, because all of them, they have to keep buying Microsoft, and the margins we make on Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft Office are pretty fat. So
Right. Yeah.
To your other point about the deficit, can we have both? Can we have a smaller deficit and the American companies still doing what they can do compared to China?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so first off, right, and the whole entire idea of what DOGE is focused on, in the short term, anything conversation about the deficit is going to go like this. But if we get AI unlocked, DOGE is going to benefit that. But more importantly for U.S. corporates, right? U.S. corporates, the reason why U.S. corporates are so dominant really doesn't have anything to do. It has to do with the U.S. government, but not with the U.S. government in deficit. The reason why U.S. corporates are so dominant is because of the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. The Bill of Rights is what makes U.S. corporates so dominant, because the fact that the Bill of Rights is what allows us to guarantee if I invent something, you can't take it. If I build something, you've got to justify before you can basically say that's mine and you can tax or anything else. It gives us this wall of protection for US innovation, and it's why we are the greatest innovators in the world. If you look at US corporate market cap, so US corporate R&D, I think it's something like 50 to 60% of all US corporate R&D for public US companies is funded by companies that were venture backed in the last 20 years. If you look at companies that, if you look at US corporate market cap, the leaders, the top 20 companies in the US corporate market cap have changed completely in the last 20 to 25 years. Buffett actually has a great presentation on this that Buffett takes you through, and he goes, let's look at who are the leaders in the world in terms of aggregate size and market cap in the world over the last like 25 years ago. And you've got ExxonMobil in there, you've got GE in there, you've got a bunch of Japanese companies in there. Now he goes, let's throw it up right now. All those Japanese companies have been replaced by Chinese companies. But guess what? There's also still a ton of US companies up there, and they're all different because the venture capital cycle of innovation that we have in the US, which is all backed by the Bill of Rights, is here and is so powerful and gives us this massive leg up and advantage to anyone else in the world on innovation, which is why Joel and I often say this thing. We go, it's not mega, it's not make America great again. It's America is the greatest and is set up to be the greatest for forever, full stop. And that's the truth. So
Forever.
I'm off my soapbox now.
Forever is a long time.
Forever probably is too generous, but at least for the next 40 to 60 years, assuming that somebody doesn't do something completely stupid to destroy our rights that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights, we're set up for, as we say, Pax America 2100 for the next 80 years.
Yeah, I sincerely hope that you are correct. I feel like we're getting into a weird area here when people probably don't care about our political views, but I personally am afraid that the assault on the rule of law has been substantial for decades. And there's too much, like just very quickly, I promise people will get off of this. Dan just has an infirmity of character where if he doesn't get rid of this stuff, his head will explode. And you don't want to see that, do you?
Yeah. But I want to hear this. Yeah.
Yeah. So all I'm going to say is that I'm into The Road to Serfdom by Hayek. So there's no way that, like, my head is filled with this right now. It's absolutely filled with it. And the point is just that you get to totalitarianism by assaulting the rule of law, and the rule of law simply doesn't respect persons, in Hayek's phrase, meaning there's the place for influence is dramatically reduced, and everyone is held to the same objective rule of law standard. Whereas in totalitarianism, Lenin had this famous phrase, whom, right? Who is going to decide what for whom? You're right. So it's all about influence, and it's all about who you know and how much power you have with your contacts and stuff. And we all know that, like, I think I just saw a story about Zuckerberg buying a mansion in DC. They think it was him anyway. And I'm like, well, he didn't do it because he wants to vacation there. I'm just saying, right? So, but I hope you're right. And we all know that, the US model has created this massive advantage and massive standard of living for a long time now. And nobody wants to lose that. Nobody wants to lose their standard of living. And a lot of people, even in this country, want a better one. And I hope we all realize that we get there by, respecting those rights and having a rule of law, et cetera, and shrinking the $36 trillion debt burden, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I wonder now is, we talk about AI a lot in the generic, right? But, we know, like, there's such a thing as large language models, right? The ChatGPT and so forth. There's got to be other super important categories of AI, applied. And it sounds like, am I right? Is all the stuff that we expect government to use based on large language models, or is it something entirely different? is what I wonder.
No, I mean, there's going to be, yeah, I think that there's going to be a medley of stuff that we're going to see go on, right? You're going to have everything from, robotic process automation and traditional machine learning stuff that, that we can unlock and that's going to kick off. Those things are going to happen. We're going to see large language models and other generative AI that's going to be important for this. I mean, there is stuff that is going on from when you talk about the NSAs of the world and DARPAs of the world in terms of the next level of how you apply this, not large language models, but other generative AI and truly neural network type things that are going to continue to accelerate from what the Palantirs of the world do to unlock that to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that when you look at that, there's going to be a medley of different levers of AI and ways of doing data analysis that are all going to be important so it's to not get hooked on, to your point, the idea of it's ChatGPT and OpenAI or the large language model. It's really about the idea, to your point, Dan, of unlocking a lot of that stuff.
Right.
That's all going to happen.
I wonder, the reason I bring this up is there was a paper that was forwarded to me by our colleague Greg Diamond. It was forwarded to a bunch of us internally, and it was called ChatGPT is Bullshit. That was the title of the paper. I'm not making it up. And the idea was, it's sort of like you're, highly intelligent but not so well informed, relative or something who is full of it, at family events. But a lot of what he's saying is correct and his facts are correct, but something is off about all of it. He doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Stitching.
And you get that with these ChatGPT and Bard and whatever else there is out there that people are using. So I guess I wonder, is the problem that there's too much data and we're asking too much of those models and used within the government, and by intelligent people, they'll have just a better pool of data, or is there something inherent about the large language model that just doesn't quite always get it right?
All right, now everybody, whoever wanted their eyes to roll back in their head when Dan was talking about the Road to Serfdom, and Dan, by the way, once you're done with Road of Serfdom, I recommend you reread The Republic by Plato if you haven't. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk about the evolution of governments, great refresher for that. But now for everybody to roll back their eyes back in the back of their head for talk about tech stuff. Right. When you look, right, the important thing that happens for large language models, right, you talk about hallucination and all that other stuff, but also you talk about it's a general AI, right? Eventually it's going to be, right, in terms of it covers everything. When you do this correctly, right, this is when you look at, for instance, in the Defense Department, they have the Navy has their own, call it generative AI model. The Air Force does, the Army does, the Marines do, and right, Special Ops does, et cetera. And each of them, right, for those models, they lean on things like RAGs, right, which is basically effectively a finite, smaller, shrinking set of data that you say, hey, focus on this set of data only when you're giving me answers, and focus on this framework of doing things when you give me answers. And a lot of when you talk about the GPTs or anything else that people engage with, when you're talking about what the government is going to be working with, when we're talking about what companies work with, we talk about a Twilio, right? To come back with Twilio. Twilio isn't basically saying, hey, ChatGPT, sit next to this guy who's having a conversation and listen to him and help him. They're actually saying, all right, let's take the bare bones of how a large language model works and how these frameworks work. Now what we're going to do is we're going to train you on a specific subset of data and say, hey, don't venture outside of this subset of data. This subset of data is where you live. And by the way, these rules about how we talk about that data, that's how you live. In the exact same way as when you try to teach, Dan, yeah. I know I don't think this is a hot topic to bring up. I know that you are a gun enthusiast. Mm-hmm. If you ever take somebody who's, say maybe an 8th grader out and you're like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to shoot a gun. You don't basically go, hey, go do whatever you want. You go, hey, we're going to give you a very finite universe of what you can do to shoot this gun. Okay. And we're going to draw those lines around it. And by the way, with the moment that you do something that's not that, we're taking the gun away from you. It's the same thing when you properly train these large language models to be specialists using a lot of different tools like regs with specific data that you can do, specific prompting and frameworks that you do. It's the same thing. It's like basically teaching a person how to first shoot a gun until, maybe after 10 years of them shooting a gun and you go, you know what? I trust you enough to say that you can do what you're going to do. Obviously, at the shooting range, we still have rules. But when we're out and about and we're, hunting or whatever else, all right, I trust you. I'm not going to basically watch you like a hawk. I don't know if that's a good
Okay.
analogy, but
No, that makes a lot of sense. Trained on a specific set of data. I guess the problem I'm seeing in ChatGPT is you can't train it to know everything there is available on the internet, right? It's just
mhm,
it's asking too much of it. That's why you get that BS effect, maybe. But it's
exactly.
not asking too much to learn, how the Navy builds submarines or whatever it is. Um,
Right. And
makes a lot of
Dan, if
sense.
you ever want to play with this, and anybody else who wants to play with this, there's a great tool that Google actually has called Notebook LM. And what Notebook LM does is it's got a large language
Notebook
model
LM.
behind it.
Okay.
But what Yeah, Notebook LM. But what you can do is there's other tools that can do this, but this is the most easily accessible one because it's made by Google. Then what you do is you can drop in, let's say 20 different documents, right? Let's say that you really want to learn all about how Hayek and how all of the Austrian thinkers think. And you want to basically say, I want to have a conversation with Hayek and everybody else. You can drop in all of their books and say, hey, look, I want you to basically just read their books and from based on synthesizing of everything that's just coming from them, I want to have a conversation with you, right? And I want to debate. I want to debate Hayek. I want to debate, any of the other greats, and basically say, hey, let's have this conversation. You can actually do that because it all of a sudden it's not pulling from, oh, let's look at what Milton Friedman says. It's not pulling from what you're going to get if you talk to Keynes. It's just you're just talking to effectively Hayek and the Austrian greats if you want to.
Wow.
That's a tool that Notebook LM can do, and that's like what's called. It's basically building a RAG, is what it's called.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you
but
know how to
like
sell
that's
it to me.
the
I'll
tool to
give
be
you
able to do
that.
it. I do what I
Yeah,
can.
I think Perplexity has a similar one or a similar feature in it. Another one of those models that
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten as far as the challenge with keeping up with this stuff for a normal person is like I've got as far as knowing that it exists, but then not having it as part of my daily life yet. Like
You and me both.
putting
Well,
and I
but to your
just
point,
I mean these are all like actual points. Like this will happen. I think over time as people get more comfortable with the tools, but
Yeah.
but
this is
that
still
right there,
opportunity.
like, so right, because I know that Dan would love this, and I'm sure you would too, Corey. Literally, think about one of the greats that you respect, and then if you can find a PDF of their work, as long as, look, I mean, obviously, ideally, you've already bought the book, so that when you find the PDF that you find for free online, you're not stealing the data, because you've already done it. But you load up, the 3 PDFs of the 3 books that you love, right? I mean, and you basically say, hey, I want to, and this is a great way for somebody who's never really experienced the idea of using a bigger picture AI other than just going to ChatGPT and saying, hey, I want to go on a trip here. What are the 5 things that I should do? Or why did the market fall today? Right? If you want to say, hey, I want to actually understand the bigger ways to do it. This is a super easy, everyone. You want to experience what are the kind of things you can do? Do that. Find 3 books that you love from one author. I might do it for Kurt Vonnegut now that I think about it. So I can have a conversation with Kurt Vonnegut. Great author in my opinion. But
Yeah.
so right out, load them in, and then you go and you say, okay, now I'm gonna ask you questions, right? I'm gonna have a conversation with you because I know that the model is just focusing on that data I've given it, and that's the kind of power that you can unlock. So imagine that writ large with the U.S. government, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that's a usable thing that you all can do to actually experience this in a fun way that's useful for you.
If I were really smart, I would create a program that would just go to Project Gutenberg, read everything, and then and then let's talk. you know,
Right?
that would be awesome.
Like today, yeah. Basically, today you are so and so, right?
That's right.
Today you are Minsky, and I want to learn all about when markets are overly steady and calm, and we had leverage. What's a good example right now of a part of the market where that might be happening? Minsky, go
Right.
find me, and he's going to talk to you like Minsky, right? So you're going to hear all about Minsky moments, right, and stuff like that. Like that's genuinely the kind of thing that you can do.
Awesome. Well, I'm sold. Um, so
Sounds like a Friday Digest to me, Dan.
I'll take one of those. Yeah. Yeah. In about in a year or two, it will be, but not. I mean, but I'll definitely take one of those. And I just pulled it up here, Google's Notebook M. So I'm ready to go, and maybe I'll I'll
Yeah,
have
you've
to
convinced me to retry it as well.
yeah.
To dip my foot in again. Yeah.
All right. So this has been great. We're at the point when we ask our final question, and I'm dying to hear what you've got on your mind with everything we've spoken about. And it's just the same final question for every guest. You know, it's identical, even if it's a non-financial topic. Same identical question. If you've already said the answer, feel free to repeat it. So it's just for our listener. If you could leave them with a single thought today, a single takeaway, what might it be?
I think that the single thought would genuinely be this idea that when you look at what's happening in the US government right now, that's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months around AI that no one's really talking about right now. And this the lattice work that we've laid in the structure, it's going to unlock a revolution around what's happening in AI that's not just about the US government. And US government is actually going to end up not being the most important part of this. It's that this is going to be somebody's opportunity inside the public sphere to show people the exact conversation that we just had around Notebook LM and the power of that, the power of actually unlocking AI to do powerful tasks and create significant value for the US economy. That's the biggest thing that's going to happen for the next 3 to 6 months. And so just be watching that and be watching it not in the mode of, oh, what's happening from a political perspective, what's happening from a tariff perspective. Keep your eye on the ball on what's going to happen with AI, because that's going to set up a potentially decade-long investment opportunity to those people who are paying attention to it the right way.
And before we sign off here, you do have a presentation about this coming out soon. So
We do.
Is there a link that listeners can go to sign up to see it?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, the our presentation goes live on April 24th is when it does, which is all about what we're calling DOGE Phase 2. And I think that we're going to have some info, Dan, Corey, that we'll probably give you in terms of the link. I don't have a link yet, but
Okay.
keep an eye on that because I think that we're going to be talking a lot about it, and for everybody to be able to get aware of it. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Rob. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for joining us.
Dan, Corey, thanks so much. Always a pleasure. Always enjoy the conversation, no matter where it goes.
Great.
Thanks. Yeah.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.